I'm Peter Marks, former theater critic for the New York Times and the Washington Post, now working both sides of the stage.
No angle left uncovered by you. You're like the busiest guy I know.
I am busy. It's true.
Yeah, it's wild. It's really wild. And I'm Elizabeth Vincentelli, and I write about many things, but especially theater for the New York Times. Welcome to another episode of Marks and Vincentelli. And once again, we're going to get very, very close to the third rail of theater. And no, our guest today is not Patti LuPone, by the way, have you been reading about how she was on this gay cruise?
Yes, in Turkey.
She was the entertainer. I hasten to. I'm specifying that she has not joined a lesbian cruise.
But she was denied. Weren't they denied a port of call in Turkey?
Yeah,
she was outraged?
Yeah, she was outraged because, the gay cruise was not welcome in Turkey and in some other port too, apparently. So, but I have to say that I would love to be a fly on the wall on a ship full of gay men and Patti LuPone. I might have to go undercover. I don't know how. I don't know how that would work. That would be such a good stunt piece, wouldn't it? Mm. Anyway, our subject today is it's definitely a little heavier than the prospect of me going undercover on a gay cruise with Patti LuPone. Today, we are chatting with Jonathan Spector, the playwright whose Eureka Day won the Tony Award for Best Revival of a Play last year, and whose new play, Birthright, is at MCC until August 23rd. And the show touches on a lot of things, and one of them is, as the title suggests, the place of Israel in the life of Jewish Americans, or at least some of them. There's 6 characters, and let's say they're all very, very involved in that, because most of them met on a Birthright trip. Some of them already knew each other before.
7 characters, right? 7 characters, including the mom?
7, you're right. The mother. You're absolutely correct. 6 friends and the mother of one of them. So a quick explainer for listeners who may not be familiar with the term. Birthright is a free 10-day trip to Israel, and the goal is to help young Jewish people from around the world, not just Americans, connect to their heritage and to that state.
Well, also, I would add to that, Birthright, first of all, it's paid by the Israeli government. And it's a tacit encouragement for people to not only relate to Israel, but even to think about immigrating to Israel, I would say. That there's some longer connection, and also that the connections one has to make to being Jewish are not necessarily just through your mother. It's not just the matrilineal thing. I know people who've gone through Birthright. I didn't go. I didn't even know about it when I was younger. But people who have even more distant Jewish connections are encouraged, because this is really an attempt to sell people on Israel. And Eureka Day, his earlier play, the other thing we should say is that MCC Theater is off Broadway. Eureka Day was on Broadway. Eureka Day was about a group of parents and school administrators at a private school, a very funny play, who had to deal with vaccine requirements after an outbreak of mumps, and all the comic possibility that can be derived from that Spector found. And Birthright takes place, that was really done in a much shorter period of time. Birthright takes place over 20 years. There's 3 acts. The first act is 2006, the second act is 2016, I think, and the third is 2024. And it's a lengthy play. It's 3 hours and 20 minutes, directed by Teddy Bergman. And I would say we can couch this as a play that has a larger scope than many plays now that try to tell a very intimate story. This is a more epic kind of quality of play that's really delving deeply into attitudes in the Jewish world about Israel, and in ways that are quite provocative.
And it's not tiptoeing around it. It really builds up. It's a very, in a way, it's a very classic structure. It's 3 acts. and it really builds up to a very kind of confrontational third act that has a lot of arguments that you probably, if you're listening to this podcast, you are very, very familiar with that have been going on for the past couple of years. And so the play really is very kind of frontal about it, which I have to say I was a little surprised because I feel like American theater very often has been a little like not as fast to react. I think the British in general are, I think, a little bit more swift on their feet with that. And this one just really, really goes for it. And so in the aftermath, and the play deals very, very openly with the aftermath of the October 7th attack. And two of the characters in particular come to verbal blows and taking opposite sides about the responses to the attack.
Right.
And they pretty much give voice to a debate that's raging within the Jewish American community. I mean, in America at large, but specifically in the Jewish American community. And it should be noted that there is people who are really not taking well to the production. And in fact, in an Instagram story, the actor Eli Gebb was in the show. And you may remember him from, he was in Stereophonic. He played one of the engineers in Stereophonic.
Right, very well.
And in an Instagram story, Eli Gebb wrote, "I've been outspoken as an anti-Zionist Jew, and I remain so. I believe in the show and will be continuing to perform in the production." And I think, for me, that means that this is an actor, this is a person, and like the show, that is really about, well, let's talk it out. Let's talk about this. And the show is very good about that, I think. It's a very good, I hope it's a conversation starter, not a conversation ender.
Yeah, it's a debate play. It's a character-rich debate play. And in that regard, what seems to upset some people is that it presents an argument on both sides of an issue regarding, singularly focused about, subtextually focused on, Israel's right to exist and its behavior towards Palestinians. How you feel about that very much will inflame some people. And but theater is supposed to be provocative. It's supposed to get your juices flowing, and it's not supposed to just validate your feelings about the world. If we did that, we all should just go into meetings with like-minded people and sit and talk for an hour, and you can all agree with each other. So I have absolutely very little patience for people who can't listen and find the theatrical and dramatic context for an argument. So that's just me, maybe. I don't know. Anyway.
No, I agree with you. But also what's I want to go back also to something you said. Like, it's also a character play.
Right.
Those are not just like slogans and arguments.
Right. It's not a PowerPoint presentation.
Back and forth. There are real people. And in fact, the play really patiently builds those characters as you go along, because the real arguments really take place towards the end. But you've had time to get to know these people over a couple of hours. Right. And that makes a huge difference, because also someone you may find sympathetic may happen to be holding an opinion that you find distasteful or wrong.
Yeah,
and vice versa. You may be agreeing with the person that you find really annoying.
Well, I found them all very human characters, and not villains and heroes. And we should say the cast is terrific. Bergman did a great job with this play. It includes Zoe Winters in the cast, Molly Ranson, Molly Bernard, Hale Appleman, Nate Mann, and Liz Larson, in addition to Eli. Yeah,
Liz Larson is the seventh character that, you're right, she plays the Zoe Winters character's mother.
Right.
Very, very funny. She's a bit of the comic relief,
actually. Yeah. Well, they all have funny moments. That's the other thing we should say. It's a very funny play. And credit goes to Bernie Telsey at MCC Theater for bringing this piece this lengthy piece. It's one of those, when we think, Elizabeth, about committing 3 hours and 25 minutes of our lives or whatever it is to a play, it might give you pause because you worry that, you're going to just be frozen in your seat all day. And it moves. This play really moves. It didn't feel like 3 hours and 25 minutes.
No, I agree. And I also feel that audiences are ready to be immersed in a world for an extended period of time. Like you're in it and you're really like living with those characters. And I know, there's 2 intermissions and I was like, okay, well, what's going to happen next? Because time is going to move on. It's like, what happened to them? It's very, very different play. But for some reason, I was reminded of August Osage County, which is another very big play with much bigger cast. Even.
Well, and I would say, August Osage County won the Pulitzer. I would say, as a 5-time member of the Pulitzer jury, that Pulitzer, whatever the jurors are this year, I think they should pay attention to this play. And we should pay attention to Jonathan Spector, who's our guest. So, Jonathan, welcome to the podcast.
So, Jonathan, can you tell us a little bit about the origin story of Birthright?
Yes. About back in, I don't know, I want to say late October 2023, I'd gotten a call from Michel Hausman, who runs Miami New Drama, who I knew a little bit, but I'd never worked there. I'd never worked with him, but I liked him and had talked about a couple of their projects in the past that hadn't panned out. And he called me and said he wanted to commission me to write a play about, sort of what was happening in the American Jewish community in this moment. And I immediately said no, that's a terrible idea and I don't want to touch that. But he sort of called back a couple weeks later and, we kept talking and it was certainly, there were a lot of things I was sort of, trying to make sense of in that time. And I think I said no a couple of times, but at a certain point I was like, sort of, let me explore a little bit and started doing a series of interviews just with other American Jews, starting with some people I knew and then kind of expanding out to circles of people that I didn't know and really just trying to get kind of as wide a range of not just politics, but also kind of people's relationship to Judaism and kind of everything else. And, a theme that kept coming up in those conversations was people's experience going on birthright trips. And so that, started to seem like a sort of, centralizing idea. And then the other kind of universal theme was just kind of the difficulty everybody was having in different ways of trying to figure out how to kind of make sense of and navigate this time. And for some people that was, I think, a kind of, changing understanding of their relationship to Israel. For some people, it was about difficulty they were having with, friends or family in their lives around this, and not being sure how to sort of how to navigate that. And so it felt like there was something, thick enough to kind of to dive into, even though I was still quite scared to do it, because but both because obviously it's like it was such a sort of scary topic, such a huge topic, and such a thing where also like the reality is changing sort of day to day, and so trying to write into something that's happening in the moment is sort of a crazy thing to do, as well as a thing that everybody else is talking about all the time. And so how can you what else is there to say about it besides what everyone is saying on the internet 24 hours a day?
One of the things we should point out is Birthright is a very well-known program within the Jewish community. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's well-known beyond, I have many Jewish friends. I didn't go on it myself, but I have many Jewish friends who had experiences with Birthright. It's an interesting title for a play right now, given the Supreme Court's decision on birthright citizenship in this country. It has nothing to do with that we should say. But the context is something that really is a shared experience by Jews that I don't know that there's anything quite like it that any other country does. I may be unclear on that, but I don't know that there's anything quite like this idea of forging a stronger identity with a country that you have a religious identity connection to, that a government really wants us to feel that more intimately and powerfully.
Yeah, and I did not go on it either. It was, of the age I am, it was sort of around when I was like getting out of college, but I think it was new enough that I didn't, it was not a big thing on my radar. But I think people, like the characters in the play, are about 5 years younger than I am. And so it seems like that people I know of that generation, that everybody who were Jews either sort of went on it or knew many people who did. And of course, people had like a wide range of experiences and reactions to that. And to some, it really, did, I think, a thing that it's meant to do of like drawing them much closer to Israel and to their Judaism. Other people, became very alienated by the experience or what they felt like was a sort of being propagandized too. So, yeah, it's sort of, and my understanding, I might have this slightly wrong because it's hard to ever get to the bottom of things, but from sort of research is that like, the initial impetus of the creation of the program was really like American Jews' fear about the rates of intermarriage and that they thought they could like, and then I think pretty early on I'm not sure at what point like Sheldon Adelson got very involved. I don't think he was involved in the founding, but like around then it became much more explicitly also about kind of building people's, ties to Israel. But and I think now has expanded. Now it's sort of I think early on it was kind of a pretty narrow age window of 18 to 24 or something, right. And now I think it expanded it out quite a bit.
Yeah. You started by saying, Jonathan, that you had a lot of trepidation about diving into this whole question. You have a great ability to parse argument and give that character and a richness across a spectrum of characters, which is a great gift for a playwright to have. I would think this would have been like, let me at it. I can do this, but yours was a little bit like, well, you were going to touch the third rail, sort of. And
well, I think that's a piece of it. And I think it was also like confronting, the depths of my ignorance around every aspect of it, both in terms of the history, the politics, not just with Israel, but also like the knowledge of Judaism at a deeper level than I had. And so there's that, but then there's also just the thing of it's very hard to find a way to write about something that I think of writing a play as like you have this sort of secret obsession that whatever this thing is that you stumble into and you become very obsessed with it and everybody else gets put here and you talk about it,
Right.
So it's difficult to do that if it's a thing everybody else is also talking about all of the time. So it was a very different experience than, when I wrote Eureka Day, which I'd started working on in like 2016, 2017. And it's not that nobody was talking about vaccines at the time, but it was not what it became later when it was something everybody, was talking about and thinking about and had opinions about. And people, I'd done different interviews where people were surprised to learn that I had written that play before COVID. And I would always say I could never have written it after COVID because it was too much swimming in the soup of sort of everyone's ideas at that point.
I saw that play in Washington, I think it was pre-COVID. So it's interesting to me that people associate, contextually, the moment they're in or they've just lived through with what you were interested in writing about, which makes me ask the question, the time span of this play starts in 2006, and there are kind of one of the wonderful thing, it takes place in 3 decades, at 2006, then in 2016, and then in 2024. And we also get the flavor of what's happening in the world of technology, of politics, of how that's evolved over time. And those things are kind of beautifully baked in to the play. And we sort of understand things about the characters based on their lives outside of Israel. Not, it's not strictly about their relationship to Judaism and Israel. It really is about their relationship to one another and how it's affected by all these other things. So it seems to me you're dealing with a whole universe of a sociological and political understanding of the world that these young people, increasingly aging people, go through.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of, once I sort of was muddling my way through writing the play, realized that one of the things about writing about something that everybody's talking about all the time is that arguments are not very interesting. Or like that. I probably wrote, 100 to 200 pages of arguments that are not in the play. And what I would realize is every time I would hear actors read them out loud, as soon as it got to a place where people were just having arguments and it wasn't coming out of a sort of character need to say this thing, the play just becomes lifeless. And it's really,
right.
What I realize is it's not, and this is, I think, the sort of way I found something that I could get interested in exploring, that it's not really a play about the politics of Israel, and it's a play about, because I think of a play as always like a thing, a sort of what is the question that I'm wrestling with that I don't know the answer to, and I think that I'm sort of trying to work out in the play, and for this play it's really like, what is the role of politics in our personal relationships and our professional relationships, and I think that's also a thing, through all time, that has been a thing that people have wrestled with in their interpersonal relationships and familiar relationships. But I think also with the rise of technology, that's changed it, because now it's not just that we have a fight with a relative at Thanksgiving over dinner and maybe we don't want to talk to them anymore. It's also now somebody a little bit reposts something on Instagram, and maybe you then decide you don't want to talk to that person. But what does it even mean that they, if we think of like a spectrum of acts from like somebody has a private thought that they don't do anything about that maybe you disagree with, which we all want to live in a society where people can have whatever private thoughts they want, to like, I'm like bombing an abortion clinic, and we don't know always like where to put, I posted something on the internet on that spectrum when it probably lives much closer to like, this was my private thought in my head that doesn't really mean anything, but we treat it, it messes with our sense of what's happening. So that's not the main, obviously like the rise of technology is the main thing it's about, but looking at that time frame was a way of thinking about the way all of these things intersect and the way, politics lands for each of these characters in different ways on their lives and relationships with each other.
So I'm curious, when did you decide, did you always want to have that scope in terms of the time? Because it takes place over 18 years. So there's 2 intermission and then the action fast forwards like 8-10 years. And then, the next act takes place in a different chunk of time. Like, was that a way to get us invested in the characters so we understand where they're coming from when the third act happens? Like, did you decide on that structure, that scope early on?
I think at the very beginning, I thought maybe it would only be the third act. And then I realized pretty quickly that, since one of the things the play is trying to wrap its mind around is this sort of fracture within the American Jewish community, that there was no way to really understand that by only looking at it in this moment, because it's been something that has been like unfolding over a long period of time and then rapidly accelerated, I think in the past couple of years. And so I think to make sense of how we got here, you had sort of needed more of a scope. And once I realized that, then I sort of asked myself, like, well, what's the right amount of time we should cover? And because 18 is a number of special significance in Judaism, I just kind of pulled that number, out of a hat a little bit. And then once I started digging into 2006, and I realized that 2006 was the year before the iPhone came out and the year before Facebook went into wide availability, that also sort of clicked another frame onto the play that was really useful in thinking about, like, what is the journey of this thing.
It's interesting, too, because at the beginning, it was harder for people to keep track of how others were evolving. Now you can track how someone's opinions are changing. Well, if if they choose to be public, on social media. But before, you didn't know, like you knew someone, but they could live on another coast, and you didn't really know what was necessarily happening with their thought process. And now you do. And do you think it's kind of made it dramatically interesting, that knowledge? In a way, it feels like just as many unexploded time bombs for a playwright.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I hope it's dramatically interesting in this play. I don't know. I think it's something we're all trying to make sense of what it means. I was just reading an article yesterday about this philosopher who has this theory about which he calls like the unicontext, that what the internet has done is like, rather than it used to be that we understood you like behave differently at work than at the bar, we're all now living all the time in a sort of the same context with everybody all the time. And one of the things she says this does is that the good is much more context dependent than the bad. And so that's why it has I could say I had a really amazing meal at this restaurant, but the kind of food I like might be different than the kind of food you're like. Whereas if I say I got food poisoning at this restaurant, we all agree that's horrible. And so like there's a sort of like way that this unicontext pushes us towards the bad is her theory, which I'm sort of trying to wrap my head around, but I think is super fascinating.
Well, you've used this very deftly in plays, both in Eureka Day and now in Birthright, the social media aspect of our lives and the way that spins in unexpected ways, even farcical ways. But in this play, it strikes me as when we watch the evolution of how these people relate to each other and communicate, through the prism of having had this collective experience that they all shared and they bonded over, and then to watch both in terms of their interactions and what we see on screens over time, the way in which things spin out of control when it is taken into the forum of anybody can comment on anything, and how it can actually ruin lives and relationships, not just that it helps us all connect in the way in which traveling together in Israel, forms this warmth of and long-term care for each other. It all can be unwound so quickly by the world on this very, very confusing platform, or series of them, that allows everybody to muddy the waters of your relationships.
Yeah, and I think like anything, nothing is all good and all bad, and it's not that there's no good that comes from these platforms and our awareness of things that we would otherwise not be aware of, as well as, which is not to, spoil the end of the play for anybody who hasn't seen it, but also like that's part of the idea of the sort of gesture of the, having that Kaddish at the end with people zooming in, that like this technology, which can...
Don't get me started. I sobbed.
It's not only...
I sobbed.
Nothing is ever only, any piece of technology or any development is never all one thing or the other. It's all of the things all at once. So that's also the case with this.
So has the play being developed, like, are you very present in the rehearsal room? Like, do you kind of absorb from what's happening in the rehearsal room and make a, like, how is that working?
I love, to me, being in rehearsal for me is the I think of like, writing is sort of misery, and the reward, if you do a good job for going through that misery, is that you get to spend time in a room with other people working on the play. So I love to be in rehearsal, and I'm gain so much from from the actors, and especially if you have some of the wonderful actors we have who are like incredibly intuitive and connected, and so if there are moments that they are bumping on, they're probably sensing something that is a missing beat there or something, as well as with with a play like this that's sort of a big ensemble play where people are on stage all the time. Like you can only get so far just in your own head of like tracking the energy of what's happening on stage with sort of all these different people all at once. In at a certain point you need to actually be in the room and seeing it, and then are kind of adjusting based on kind of what's happening.
So you did it first in Miami at Michelle Hausman's theater, Miami New Drama, which I actually was at this year to see another play. that was done. And but I'm curious, what did you see on stage there that you examined and thought, all right, this is what I got to work on, or did you feel like this was a perfect thing?
Oh no, not at all. I truly felt like, because the time, it was so fast. I mean, where, I'd agreed to write the play in I don't know, February or March maybe of 2024. And then he was like, all right, and we'll produce it next season, which, to me was insane. I mean, at that time, I don't think
Right.
I had decided I was going to try and write this enormous, that it was going to be quite so long, but I still thought that was crazy. But, I got the last laugh, because then I turned in a play that, needed a working hot tub on stage. And, it was three. I think the first draft I handed, the first table read we had in Miami was like 4.5 or 5 hours long.
Wow.
But it was very much like I had not finished. I mean, it to me was not a finished play when we went into rehearsal. And so we were very much kind of building the plane in the air. And I was waking up at 3 or 4 a.m. before rehearsal for the first 2 weeks to rewrite every day. And it was kind of awful, and I never want to do that again. But we did,
I don't blame you.
but it did manage to kind of come together, although it was very clear, like, it's still, to me, like, it still had a long way to go, even though the general shape of it was there. And it's been a really wonderful process, because Teddy Bergman directed it down there as well. And then we've had, in the interim between that and this, have done, I don't know, 4 or 5 kind of readings or workshops, or had a really nice kind of continual development process from there, to get to this place of just really trying to sort of shape it and hone it. And then the other part that's so tricky is, and that I'm still thinking about, and if there's more life, we continue to think about, is that, the play is set in, the third act is set in 2024, in part because that's about when I started writing it. And I just had to decide, like, I can't read the New York Times in the morning and then like change the play based on the headline. I have to just stop. And, but at the same time, I think, if you tell an audience that this is 20 years ago, they can receive that and understand it. If you tell an audience this is 2 years ago, that's a very hard thing for them to hold on to. So one of the things that I'm, thought about and continue to think about is like how to make it both authentic to what people would have been doing and thinking and saying in June of 2024 when that third act takes place, and also things that feel relevant and truthful and authentic, to this moment when the reality of the situation in Gaza, of we're in such a dramatically different place, I think, both in terms of, in terms of the destruction of Gaza, in terms of the shift politically that's happening in the United States since then. So I think that's a place that I was continually sort of thinking about and continue to think about kind of how to sort of thread that needle in a way.
You could write Act 4, in 8 years, and it'll be in 2030, and the play will just never end. It'll just keep growing, and I actually love the idea of like catching up with characters over a long period of time. I don't think we see that enough in theater. It's just something that I love. But I was curious, just in terms of the structure, because Eureka is also very much an ensemble play, and that's another one. I can't think, there's no lead, like it's very, very equal. We all have characters that we are maybe a little bit more drawn to or interested in, but like they're very equal. And like, what's the challenge for a playwright to write an ensemble play where everybody has to have, because this may be naive, but like, wouldn't a playwright be drawn to some of them, and then maybe even unconsciously you're like, oh yeah, they're gonna get some really good lines, but in this case it's very even-handed. Everybody gets some really good stuff.
Yeah, I've never, I don't know if I've ever written a play that was a real clear, single protagonist who had the kind of play that I know one is meant to write if you want to attract a big star to do your play. But no, I always end up writing ensemble plays just because I find it's much more fun to write that way, and it's much more fun, and makes it a fun rehearsal room to be in when everybody is kind of equally present and alive and bringing different things to it. So, I mean, it is a challenge in something like this because you're trying to keep a lot of plates spinning all the time with all of the different characters and tracking what's happening with all of them through time and how they're changing. So it was very hard to do and maddening and at times, but also really then so fun when you actually get in a room with actors and start to build it.
Jonathan, were you worried that people would want to know where you stood on Israel? That this would be somehow perceived as like trying to figure out what Spector thinks himself and which side he's on, because that is so baked into this issue these days. It's, as you mentioned at the beginning, it's such a hot button topic. Did that give you pause? And did you figure out that I'm not really going to share my own personal political view on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think I if I have any reticence about, like in an interview, talking about what I think, it's both because I don't want, because we're in, I think there's many people who want to know that so that they can say, oh, well, then this play is not for me because I'm only going to have to be subjected to the points of view that I don't hear. But also, if I could say what I think in a soundbite, I wouldn't need to write a 3-hour and 20-minute play.
Right.
But even more than that, I also think on some fundamental, like what I think isn't very interesting. Like I don't write plays to talk about what I think. I write plays to try and understand something that I don't understand about the world. So I'm much more interested in what other people think than I am.
Sure, but there's a journalistic imperative. Once you let it out into the world, once you take off the cage and unleash the beast, you're going to have journalists, and theater goers thinking, oh, Jonathan's thought very deeply about this. He must have wisdom to impart that the rest of us are waiting to write down and disseminate to other people, which maybe is, unfair. I mean, it's like that's not the impulse that a playwright necessarily has in pursuing a topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot. There's this great Thornton Wilder line about most writers begin with some sort of didactic intention, but just because we eat food cooked over a gas stove doesn't mean we taste the gas in the food. And that the more you can withhold telling the audience what to think, the more likely they are to think for themselves, which is something I certainly believe. I think we're very sensitive to feeling like suddenly we're hearing the voice of the playwright, tell us,
it was really the eavesdropping after the show. I went to the women's room after the show, and the eavesdropping was really great because people were talking about their views about some of the characters, especially in the third act. And I remember thinking, did we see the same show? Like I was stunned by what they thought was where they thought like one character would be completely like just a horrible, obnoxious person, and I felt like that character was the most sensible of all, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. And it is such a Rorschach test where the eye of the beholder just projects so much into it, because of course we all bring something, and that's why it's so slippery. And I think a lot of people right now, I mean, we're just in a society where like slippery concepts are like they're really hard to grasp, because you need more than a soundbite. And in fact, like one of the key things in the show is one of the characters brings up the concept of having contradictory interpretations, and they can coexist in the same universe. But yeah, I was wondering if you think holding contradictory elements at the same time is like a guiding principle for good theater.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be. I think it is can also be a guiding principle in Judaism, which is a thing that the play is very interested in. Mm-hmm. I think it's less for me. I mean, it's something that I think did inform the kind of spirit of the play in a real way, was just when I was doing these initial kind of interviews with people, and it was so I found it so heartening to be in a position where I was talking to people and had no obligation to convince them of anything, but was really just trying to sort of listen to them and understand them and where they were coming from. And it's not to say that I agreed with all of them, many of them I strongly disagreed with, but to be released from the obligation to argue with them, because that's not what I was there to do. I was there to sort of try and understand them. And I think that sense of people don't have to be, you can see people as human without conceding that means you think they're right about something. You can think they're horribly wrong. And I think that, doesn't inform the spirit of the play as well.
I'm curious about also, Jonathan, what the actors teach you about your play. I know there were some cast changes that happened even very late into this process. And I felt when I saw it yesterday that these actors were so completely in the moments that they were revealing. There was no, I don't know, I felt like, it could have been dictated by them into the script. What do actors bring for you in terms of enriching their stories? Do they help you when you hear it in a different way? I know actors, I'm writing a play and I've had actors read it and actually make some suggestions that I went, oh my God, that's really good. That really helps me. I mean, how much of that has happened to you?
Oh, I mean, with this ensemble is so incredible. And so I think there's so much of that. Some of it is just the, what they're finding in the characters and the way the depth they're bringing to things, and that unlocks something for you that you didn't see, or sometimes it's, them, especially when when it's a scene with 6 people. And so you're trying to juggle all of these different things at once. And it's easy to sort of take your eye off the ball of one of them, but the actor is only following their thread. And so then they will say, hey, I don't know why I kind of stopped talking about that thing. And you're like, oh, right. I forgot about that, and so there's that element too, or there's, Zoe Winters, who's kind of been on board, from relatively early on. We did a bunch of development with her, and is such an intuitive actor. And so there've been a number of times where she will be like, I just can't figure out how to get from here to here. And then I'll look back and I'm like, oh yeah, that's because there used to be something connecting those, and I cut it for this other reason and I forgot about it. But you could just like feel that it is not organic to move from this moment to this moment. And, so there's that kind of stuff too.
I love that.
And then to see, and then and then of course so much rises out of the dynamic between people when you get them all together. And Teddy Bergman is also, such an amazing, dramaturgically is a really incredible director in terms of, thinking about, that sort of energy and rhythm. And especially with a play like this, when you have in the first and the third act, 55 minute continuous action scenes, so much of making that work is about keeping the energy flowing, and making sure that you're not really dropping the ball, because then it's very hard to pick it back up again, for the audience's attention once you do. And so that's, a sort of management of time and attention.
So there's something, quite a few playwrights and shows have tried to integrate like social media or new technologies like or texting even in shows, and you have really nailed it. I think the scene that everybody remembers from Eureka Day, Eureka Day is a great play, but there's really one scene that just had a huge impact is a scene where there's a meeting and then other people are watching a kind of Zoom version of it, and they're commenting on it in real time. So we're saying we're following the meeting, but we're also reading those comments that are happening in real time. And you're doing something a little similar-ish here in the third act when the characters are living in technology time, let's say. And it's not so much the comments, but when this huge argument explodes, they're going to their phones and they're like Googling articles to help bolster their side of the argument. And we see that with this, we're seeing what they're doing. And I was wondering, how do you integrate? It is so well done because very often in other shows that I've seen, this kind of stops the show because you have these projections and you don't know where you are. It's very confusing. But there's a clarity in the way you handle it where there is a dramatic purpose. It's also very funny, but there's a dramatic purpose, and it really, because you're adding another layer. They're arguing, and then you're seeing their kind of mental, you see the wheels turning and how people build an argument. And now they're trying to bolster their side. Like, how do you go at it? Like, I'm just curious because it works so well.
Yeah, I mean, I think both with this and Eureka Day, it's a little bit, necessity is the mother of invention. And with Eureka Day, it was really coming out of a desire to bring in more voices to this community than just the 5 people who were in the room, as well as I had spent so much time researching vaccines and then the depths of these internet message boards where people would be so nasty to each other. And it felt weird to not bring that into the play, but I didn't want to make any of my characters be that nasty to each other. And so it was also that was sort of it took a long time to figure out how it would actually work, but that was how I got there. And then with this, I think it was something similar of wanting to think about how, in this time span, technology has just changed the way we exist in a room with other people, and as well as how that intersects with how we, each of us are kind of in this, almost, I think there was a time when it felt like we were entering this kind of bifurcated reality about, around maybe the 2016 election, sort of midpoint of the play, around Trump and the people who believed that, which was sort of was where when I was writing Eureka Day, that believed that, Obama had these FEMA concentration camps and that all of this conspiracy theories. And you're like, well, these people live in some fantasy world and we live in the real world. And now I think because of the way algorithms have taken over everything, we all kind of live in a reality of one that is distinct from everybody else, depending on kind of what's being shown to us. And so trying to make sense of that arc as well. But then in terms of how it was actually going to work, I mean, it was a real true collaboration between myself and Teddy and David Bengali, the video designer, as well as Lee Kinney, the sound designer, and really, and the actors. And we were really all, we'd done a workshop and to sort of begin to explore that. And then we're just, I had this sort of idea, but in terms of how it was going to actually work, it was very iterative, and it took a lot of time and exploration to kind of land on it. And even the piece of it, of sort of people going kind of underwater a little bit in sound, that was actually, I had tried to describe to my wife what I thought this was going to work like, and I had a different idea, and she misunderstood me, and she thought it was this. And then I was like, oh, that's a much better idea than the one I had. So I did that.
We should let you go in a minute, Jonathan, but I have another question about your process. So there are a couple of characters, you mentioned, I didn't, there's a Kaddish at the end, and that means something to audiences who know what Kaddish is about. But the arc of of what happens to some of these characters, particularly for me, Lev and Emerson, in the play, are they built into your idea of what's going to happen to these characters in the end when you start writing, or does it evolve as you try to figure out? Is that part of the fun of trying to figure out how far you're going to take their stories and where they're going to end? Or we're going to end with them?
I think with this play, and I haven't really done this with other plays, because of the nature of it, I did have a kind of rough idea of what the kind of arc for each of the characters through the journey of it was going to be. Obviously that changes once you get into the writing, but in terms of broad strokes, I did have that kind of going into the, I don't know if I had that before I started writing the first act, but pretty early on, I was kind of, roughing out what I thought those journeys were going to be.
And I like the fact that some are very, there's some sort of very clear cut, there's a finality to what happens to certain characters, at least along this trajectory, and others are very open-ended at the end. You're not sure what if there was going to be an 8 years later, where several of these characters would be, which is a wonderful aspect, I think, of a successful play, because you can imagine a life for these people beyond the borders of the play.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's, I mean, and I think, and so I will take some credit for that, but I also think so much of that credit is that it's also to this like incredible cast that is just, I mean, I think what they're doing is so amazing of letting you feel that journey for them and the age, and also like, I mean, on some level, people are aware, but maybe not fully because there are these intermissions. But for, particularly for Zoe and Eli and Molly Bernard, who are essentially on stage for the entire play, like they are not getting a break. All they're doing the intermission is like changing costumes. So they're basically like sprinting, for 3.5 hours through this. It's a really
amazing,
incredible acting marathon, and what they're doing. Yeah, it's really amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much. I mean, I always love when I go to the theater. I like two things. It's either like 90 minutes, no intermission, that's great, or 4 hours, great too. Like, it's just the two ends of the spectrum, and they're both completely enjoyable for such different reasons. Like, you just love going into this theater bath, or hot tub, as the case may be, and just like you're immersed in these people's stories for 3.5 hours. I love that you keep saying 3:20, but I think it's closer to 3:30. Let's not be.
Well, no, it's actually. I mean,
let's not be coy.
The true runtime is actually 3:10, but we'll keep that between us. But
really?
Yes, but they, but then because of the set changeovers and the costume changes, like the intermissions are longer than 10 minutes because they need the time. I think there's something, and I've heard from a lot of people like, it was so long, I was so worried, but it moved really swiftly. And I think there's something about, and I've seen other plays like this recently, where when you have two intermissions, then each act is less than an hour. So when the lights come up after 52 minutes, you're like, oh, that wasn't too long. I was bracing myself. This, like,
very true.
Endless.
That's exactly
so
that's the secret. That's the secret.
Well, we'll take our intermission here. Another hour, folks, with Jonathan Spector. No. This is great. Jonathan, we really, you can tell our enthusiasm. It's genuine for what you've done. Congrats. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast to talk about Birthright.
I'm a longtime listener, first-time caller. I've been listening, since you guys were, 3 on the aisle back.
Oh, my God. There you go.
Oh, my God.
Those are the magic words. You now get a turkey dinner sent to your house as a result if you say the words 3 on the aisle. So thanks.
It's true. OG listener.
Indeed.
Yes, so Birthright is at MCC until August 23rd. There's been noises about a Broadway transfer. I have no idea, but Eureka, they also started off-Broadway, so we'll see. And actually, it's kind of great, actually, that there's a lot of good shows right now. Like Summer in New York is meant to be kind of dead theater-wise, but it's not the case at all right now. In fact, I've seen quite a few shows ranging from tiny to small in recent days. And I want to mention a couple of them. Actually, they're included in a roundup of smaller shows that I did for the Times with Helen Shaw. One I want to mention is a production of Wojciech, the Buchner play. That's a staple on European stages and almost never done here. We're more likely to see the opera than the actual play. But so like a small company from Queens, I think they're based in Queens, called Adult Film, is staging it. They're a young company. I think they were created in 2022. And it's a bunch of kids, and they're operating, right now they're operating, the show is done in a converted sweater factory. They call it a factory. It's more like a workshop. It's not very big. And it's not entirely, the conversion is not entirely finished, so you're really in this half derelict building, which is very fitting for the show. It's pretty rock and roll. It's like 75 minutes with the band, and it's one of those shows that it's not always good, but I am not going to forget it. I had such a good time. I would recommend it, and I think the tickets are pretty affordable too. So that's a good one. And I also really liked an act and a show called Dukes. which is at Soho Playhouse, and I think they're going to extend as well. So I might still be around by the time this comes out.
Listen, Elizabeth, I love that you trekked out to Queens for this company. This is where, to me, we still really need critics to venture forth and not just do the tried and true and, answer publicists' invitations and go, fine, I'll be there. This is what a critic does. And my hat's off to you for doing that. And this sounds intriguing to me too. I just really think the Wojciech sounds really fun.
I think New Yorkers also know that like a lot of like the boundaries, the geographical boundaries are pushing out. So we've been going to Bushwick in Brooklyn for a while now. Now like that's also getting too expensive.
Yeah.
So people are moving into spaces in Ridgewood. For me, it's kind of a nightmare because it's not easy to get to from my part of Brooklyn.
Sure, of course.
But I do actually also, for me, it's part of the fun to discover a new neighborhood. Like I'll try to go have dinner around and it's fun. I encourage people to do that. It's super fun. And especially when the show is 75 minutes, you have time before or after, go for a drink or walk around.
Nice.
It's really fun.
Yeah. Smart. Sounds like smart theater. I'll just mention something I saw that's no longer running, which was the New York Classical Theater's production of Julius Caesar, which was done in various parks, including Central Park and Battery Park. And it's a small cast of, I think, 9 actors, directed by Stephen Bergman, the company's artistic director, really smartly boiled down and made. I saw it on a night where there were 600 people sitting in this free.
Whoa!
It was really quite wonderful. Sitting in Castle Clinton in Battery Park and then moving throughout the park. And I just want to point out one of the actors who I thought was just sensational. They were all good, but Onika Phillips, who played Brutus, fantastic, so magnetic, so much presence. One of those summer discoveries that you just remember.
I love that. I love when you see an actor who's oh my God, who is that person?
And Brutus, I've seen really, really accomplished actors, or not accomplished is the wrong word, famous actors play Brutus to much less charismatic effect. I happen to think Brutus is one of the most interesting characters in Shakespeare, and Oneka did an amazing job giving us that character's portrait. So anyway, that's it for us today. A heavy service of a delicious feast of information today. You can find us, of course, at marksvincentelli.substack.com, and you can subscribe there. Maybe even open your wallet. You'll be glad you did, because it encourages us to stick to this.
Open your heart, open your wallet. And you can follow us on social media. We use our real names. And on Instagram, podcast as his own handle, Marks and Vincentelli. Robin Sunderland is our social media impresario, except she's been away on vacation for the past month, visiting her native Australia.
How dare she?
But she's coming back soon. So I think her account will come back to life when she's back.
And thanks to, of course, our producer, Adam Gold. He's a jack of all trades. In the engineering and producing aspects.
Yes, and we'll be back soon with another edition of Marks and Vincentelli. Bye!